Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me now is Brad Bowman, Senior Director at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Brad, thank you so much for coming on.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
A lot has unfolded in the Middle East over the past few days, but I first want to start with the conflict between Hezbollah and Israel. So, over the weekend, a strike in Golan Heights killed at least 12 children on a soccer field. The IDF blamed Hezbollah. Hezbollah denied responsibility. So then earlier this week, Israel responded with a Beirut strike that killed a Hezbollah commander. What do we need to know in this conflict?
Thanks for the question. It's really an important question. I think what some of your viewers may not know, that I think is the starting point for understanding what we're witnessing currently, is that following the October 7 Hamas terror attack on Israel, which was the worst single day murder of Jews since the Holocaust, Hezbollah, the Islamic Republic of Iran's varsity terror proxy based in Lebanon, started attacking Israel on almost a daily basis on October 8th. And so there's been a low-scale war going on in Israel's north that has gotten increasingly intense, with more deadly strikes, more frequent, further into each of the respective countries across what's called the Blue Line, the effective border between Israel and Lebanon. And for a long time, Israel has been warning that if these attacks from Hezbollah, this terrorist organization in Lebanon that has a military that's more formidable than a lot of European militaries, didn't stop its attack, that things could spin out of control and do a major war. And unfortunately, we saw on Saturday, as you said, this short-range rocket launched from southern Lebanon by Hezbollah. Don't believe what they're saying. They're not known for truth-telling. Israel and the U.S. government says this was Hezbollah. It was launched from areas that Hezbollah controls. Launched this rocket, and it killed 12 children and injured more than roughly 50 people. The worst single-day attack on Israel since October 7th. And Israeli leaders responded the way you'd expect them to respond, and that is that this was unacceptable and that there would be a response. And when you're Israel, a country roughly the size of New Jersey, surrounded by largely by enemies that want to exterminate your country, then when this happens and you live in a tough neighborhood, you have to respond. And indeed, that's what they did. They responded with this strike in Beirut, taking out Fuad Shukr, who was a top commander there, and was responsible for this murder of these 12 children, and responsible for countless other attacks, and was actually involved, believe it or not, in the 1983 bombing that killed more than 240 U.S. service members. So as a former U.S. service member, it feels to me, I don't celebrate the death of anyone, but it feels to me like this individual had justice coming, and Israel delivered that justice. And so that's the Beirut strike. And then, of course, we had the big strike in Iran that we could talk about as well, if you like.
Yeah, we will talk about that in a second, but I am curious, can we expect any further escalation here, or after Israel's response to the Beirut strike, is it over?
No, I think in the Middle East generally, but particularly in what we're seeing between Hezbollah and Israel, this is almost certainly not over. My prediction would be that Hezbollah will respond to Israel, and that response could be escalatory. And so we could be here at the early stages of an escalatory cycle that could spin out of control into a full-scale war. And the thing for your viewers to understand is that these aren't vacuous words. This is a big deal if that happens, because Hezbollah is far more formidable than Hamas in Gaza is. Just to throw a few numbers on the table, Hezbollah has somewhere between 150,000 and 200,000 rockets and mortars and missiles. And so we've had periodic spats between Israel and terrorist groups in Gaza over the last few years, and you have a few thousand launched a few thousand rockets launched over a week and a half. Hezbollah could be launching that quantity in one day. And it would be a combination of unguided rockets, large quantities of those, combined with drone swarm attacks, combined with the use of precision-guided munitions. So the Israeli military is the best in the region, but that kind of attack that I'm describing could overwhelm some of Israel's air and missile defenses. And so that would put a burden on Israel to not only try to shoot those down, and it will fail in some cases to do that, but to aggressively go after the launch sites in Lebanon. So what I'm describing is a major war in Lebanon where it could become worse than what we saw in Gaza.
So let's talk about geography here for a moment. This is happening in northern Israel, but I want to turn to how this would affect the war in Gaza. Would it?
Yes. So I think it's important to understand that Hamas was not acting alone and Hezbollah is not acting alone. It's important to understand what the network that they're operating as part of. They're part of what's called a resistance movement, which sounds very noble but is not. It's just frankly a group of terrorists, a whole bunch of different terrorist groups. Who's in that group? It's Hamas, in which a lot of your viewers are familiar with in Gaza. It's Hezbollah, whom we were just talking about in Lebanon. It's the Houthis now in Yemen, which also has been attacking Israel and has been attacking U.S. sailors and civilian merchants in the Red Sea for quite some time, the most significant assault on international shipping in decades, as well as groups in Iraq and Syria. So there's a whole network of terror proxies. You can think of it as kind of a puppet master in the Islamic Republic of Iran and these terror proxy puppets. And what happens is that, and this will sound like I'm exaggerating, but I believe the evidence supports it and it stands up to scrutiny. Iran is implementing a multi-year campaign to surround, harass, harry, wear down, and ultimately exterminate the state of Israel. And I think anyone who would say, "Whoa, that sounded kind of extreme. Are you exaggerating a little bit?" Look at what happened on October 7th. Look at Iran's response. Look at Iran's response to the death of the Hamas leader in Iran. And you start to understand that this is a methodical strategy where they're trying to establish this ring of fire around Israel, America's most reliable and capable ally in the Middle East. And so America is not and should not be neutral on this. And that's why it's so important that we've come to Israel's aid after October 7th, in my view, and also when Iran conducted an unprecedented direct assault on Israel on April 13th and 14th.
So Iran is fighting Israel through these multiple proxies. Many of my guests from the FDD included have told us this, but when or at all if will we see Iran come in and Iran directly fight Israel?
It's a great question. We've already seen it. The assault I just mentioned on April 13th and 14th, we had the Islamic Republic of Iran launch somewhere close to 350 munitions at Israel. And only a small number got through. And it wasn't for lack of trying. They were absolutely trying to murder Israelis with that attack. But they failed. They did injure, sadly, one Bedouin girl, but they failed because of the sophistication and capability of Israeli air and missile defense and the assistance of the United States. And don't miss this, some of the help that came from Arab countries such as Jordan and Saudi Arabia. And that's a nightmare for Iran because, like a bully on the playground, the Islamic Republic of Iran wants to divide and conquer, divide, distract, and conquer the other kids so they can pick them off one by one. So that's why it's so important to understand what's going on here. This is a broader strategy by Iran. And if we only respond to the terror proxies, we only hit the terror puppets, and we leave the puppet master sitting back in comfort smiling, then that plays right into Iran's strategy. And unfortunately, that's what the United States and to some degree Israel has been doing for quite some time now.
Hamas's top political leader was killed in a strike in Iran. Hamas is blaming Israel. The IDF has not commented. What does this strike do to the Israel-Hamas war?
Yeah, it's not a great time to be a Hamas leader, and it's not a safe time to be a Hamas leader, and that's hardly surprising, right? If you conduct the worst single-day murder of Jews on October 7th, then what would you expect Israel to do? Let's remember, Israel was a country established after the Holocaust where 6 million Jews were murdered as a place of safety for Jews. And this was some combination for Israelis of Pearl Harbor and a 9/11. And just they had to respond. So of course Israel's going to go after the leaders, and that's what they've done. They've gone after Salah. There was the death on January 2nd of Saleh Arori in Lebanon. You had the death of Marwan Issa, the deputy commander of the military wing, on March 10th. You had the likely death of Mohammed Deif on July 13th. And then here on July 31st, Ismail Haniyeh, the chief political leader. So, who does that leave? That leaves Khaled Mashal in Qatar, who's sitting in comfort there in Qatar, is less relevant these days, and Yahya Sinwar, the person most responsible for the horrors of October 7th. So Yahya Sinwar is likely hiding in a tunnel in Gaza, and I suspect he's probably going to find his final demise there in that tunnel. So Israel has been successful in going after Hamas leadership, as you'd expect them to, as they had no choice to do. Roughly 2/3 of Hamas's fighting force has been destroyed. That's the good news. The bad news is about a third, to some degree, depending how you measure it, still exists. And so one of the reasons why Israel has been reluctant to go to a full-scale war with Hezbollah is because it didn't want to be confronting two major wars at the same time. And then also keep in mind what I said earlier, right? If you have a major war in Hezbollah that lasts months or years with the kind of firepower that Hezbollah brings to that, then once again, as formidable as Hezbollah is and as necessary as it is for Israel to respond, with more than 60,000 Israelis displaced from their home, more than 24 Israelis killed, they have to do something about it. But again, if they're spending all their finite time, resources, attention, munitions on going after the puppet, then once again, there is Iran sitting back, smiling, seeing Israel get worn down as it's receiving no counterpunches itself.
I do want to talk about what this all means for a potential ceasefire deal, because the top political leader of Hamas that was killed on Wednesday, he apparently was a key figure in these ceasefire talks. So does this mean that they are stalled? Are they not on the table anymore? What does that look like?
Right. So if you think about it, if you're Yahya Sinwar or another Hamas leader, and you're looking at the offer on the table, right, and you see all of your colleagues in crime, if you will, dying, I would say receiving their just due, then that might make you, just on a human level, eager for a ceasefire, right? And the main point of contention has been whether it is a temporary ceasefire or a permanent ceasefire, right? Generally speaking, friends of Israel want a temporary ceasefire because they want Israel at a time and place of its choosing to come back and finish as much of the job as possible. Easier said than done. And friends of Hamas want a permanent ceasefire because they want this group itself, I'll speak about them directly, wants to survive, to live, and conduct a future October 7th as many times as possible. Don't take my word for it, see what they've said. So that's been the central contention. Obviously, we have the poor hostages, the ones that are still alive that need to come home sooner rather than later. But there are multiple dynamics at play here, and I would suggest that probably for the remaining Hamas leaders, what they're seeing might incentivize them to be more to view a potential deal more favorably. But again, they're going to want a permanent ceasefire, not a temporary ceasefire.
From this conversation, you're essentially saying all roads lead back to Iran. They are the puppet master here. What do you see Iran's role being as tensions continue to escalate further and further?
I think that the Islamic Republic of Iran will feel a need to respond strongly from their perspective to the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh, the chief political leader. My educated guess would be that response would come in multiple forms. We're probably going to see responses from the terror proxies. Certainly response from Hezbollah, and then also potentially responses directly from Iran. I think Iran is troubled for their part, the regime is, by the fact how easily Israel went in and did a pinpoint strike against this leader. And they're going to feel a political need to respond because, frankly, it makes them look pretty weak, and it kind of undercuts suggestions that the Islamic Republic of Iran, the regime at least, is 10 feet tall, because it's not.
And what specifically are you looking out for next in the Middle East region as a whole?
Yeah, I've been watching, and at FDD.org, we have a tracker of all the attacks on U.S. forces in Iraq, Syria, and Jordan. And your viewers can go there and see it, where we document each of those. And the point is that for so long, we had regular attacks on U.S. forces, and the Biden administration was just frankly slow in responding. But when they finally, and then sadly, because they were slow in responding, the attacks continued. And then we had the 3 U.S. service members killed at Tower 22 in Jordan, as some of your viewers remember, which was horrible. 3 patriotic Americans that will never return to their families who paid the ultimate sacrifice for our country. And so after that, belatedly, I would respectfully say, the Biden administration responded strongly. And after more than 85 attacks in one day, and then killing some militia leaders a short time later, after that strong response, what happened? Exactly what you'd expect to happen on a playground when you finally punch the bully in the face. The bully backed down for a long time, but for an extended period of weeks, there was only a couple attacks, a dramatic change from the status quo. And so my study of history since 1979, looking back to the Reagan era, looking back after the 2003 Iraq invasion, looking at the data that we lay out in detail on our website about more recently in Iraq and Syria, what I observe is that when the Islamic Republic of Iran sees weakness in Washington, it is literally a green light for more attacks. And when they see concerted strength emanating from Washington, they back down. The problem is that we do this strategic, narcissistic strategic mirroring where we think our adversaries are just like us, that if we extend a hand in friendship, extend an olive branch, hey, we don't want a regional war, we don't want to fight, then we think, oh, they'll be reasonable and they'll respond. But no, they see that as weakness and they attack us more, just like the bully on the playground. I hate to keep coming back to that, but if you have a bully who's throwing punches and you keep saying, I don't want to fight, I don't want to fight, I don't want to fight, what's the bully going to do? He's going to hit you in the mouth again. And that's the approach toward Iran. But unfortunately, in this election year, if I'm being blunt, and kind of the instinct that we see from this administration that played out, frankly, in the Ukraine context, and we've seen playing elsewhere, very good intentions, but very naive and weakness and repeating, we don't want a regional war, we don't want a regional war, we don't want it, which is all true. We don't want a regional war, we don't want an escalation. By saying that, you're signaling weakness and inviting more attacks. And if I could persuade the Biden administration of one thing, I would ask them to look at the evidence for that approach and see that it has failed.
If you could talk to the Biden administration today, how would you want the United States to respond today?
I would say that when Israel confronts one of the worst attacks in its history, you stand with Israel, and I would give the Biden administration credit for the first weeks after October 7th, both in word and in action. They stood with Israel. They continued to send an unprecedented array of weapons, quantity and array of weapons, but at the same time, the rhetoric was escalating, demonizing and isolating Israel, which was inadvertently, I would say, empowering Israel's enemies. And then every time Israel is attacked, the White House comes in and says, well, restraint Israel, restraint Israel. And if you just think about that logically again, if Israel's enemies can rely on Washington restraining Israel every time it's attacked, what are you doing? You're encouraging the enemies of Israel to attack them because they can rely on the United States to use its political power over Israel to try to restrain Israel. When you live in a tough neighborhood, you can't keep taking blows in the face and not responding. And sometimes we live in such relative safety and comfort here in Washington, we forget those basic facts. So if we want peace in the Middle East, which we all want, we've wanted for a long time, you got to understand who the number one culprit is behind what's going on. It's the Islamic Republic of Iran. And you got to understand that this regime is not like us, and that when you think you're extending a hand of friendship and moderation and you're being reasonable, you're actually signaling weakness, and you're going to get more of the same. And when your best friend in the region, Israel, your most reliable partner, is experiencing their worst day, you don't join its enemies in criticizing them. You stand with your best friend in its moment of need, and that's when people find out who their true friends are.
Brad Bowman, I appreciate the conversation today. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for the opportunity. I appreciate it.